from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist, Tony Stewart.
On today's program, we're going to deal with business trends here in North Idaho and the Northwest. We're going to give emphasis to real estate development and prices, and I know this will be of interest to our viewers who are outside of Idaho and other states, because some of the things we will discuss have similar trends in your part of the United States or Canada, and we'll also discuss how interest rates and regulation, all that affect this particular aspect of our economy. I'm very pleased to welcome to the program today four guests who are highly qualified to discuss what we are dealing with, and they've been doing that recently in some other meetings in areas such as Spokane. I first of all welcome to the program Ed Morris, who is Morris & Company Real Estate Appraisers, located here in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And next to him is Jack Beebe, who is with Beebe, McKerney, and McCarthy, and he also is in the real estate business. And I would like to add, welcome Jack back from previous visits, and he's the former chair of the Board of Trustees at North Idaho College. Thanks, and Tony. Next to him is John Butler of John Butler Associates, also a major real estate firm in our area. And our fourth guest is Chris Gibbs, who is with the commercial division of Acuff Northwest Realty, who is also another major realtor in our area. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you, and thank you for taking time from a busy schedule to discuss an important topic. And as always, I'm very pleased to have Steve Schink as our regular panelist. He is the Dean of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College, and Steve shall commence our questioning today.
Thanks, Tony. I wonder if we could maybe just paint a quick picture of an aspect of the real estate market that deserves some attention. I can recall a meeting, and I'm bad on dates, but I want to say it was last summer. Dwayne Hagedorn called a great many people together, and we all met down at the resort. And on the one hand, he told us how wonderful it was that we'd had this booming real estate market for some years in North Idaho, and on the other, he cautioned us that there were so many jobs now linked directly or indirectly to real estate that a downturn in that market could have a devastating impact on our region. And I wonder if we could just talk a little bit about just how big a part of the economy real estate and real estate development is for us.
Dwayne made a comment there that there's about 7,000 jobs tied directly to construction, and I think the figures this year are going to be, we've had record years in sales, residential homes, that with a 25% downturn that could affect 1,400 jobs. So you can imagine what that would the impact that would have on our economy, and I think you will see a downturn, not a downturn, but just smaller units of sales this year, and we've kind of seen that so far. So it's going to be interesting to see.
I don't know, John, you said you had some ideas of how many additional realtors we've brought into our market over the last 4 or 5 years, but I'm sure the number has nearly doubled. And I think that goes in all facets of the real estate market. And of course, any downturn in the market is going to affect everybody. And of course, that's a big part of our employment base. 7,000 jobs is sizable in Kootenai County.
What other kinds of businesses are we talking about in employment? We've mentioned realtors, and of course we've talked about construction, but there have got to be some other businesses.
Mortgage companies. Can you imagine the number of mortgage companies we've had come into this area in the last few years? And I don't know, Chris, if you have any idea of the number, but it's almost everything that I'm involved with in commercial leasing is that a good number of our tenants are very different number of mortgage companies.
We had 19 financial institutions that were really major in our area, I think, as far as mortgage companies in '92. In 1984, we had 31. In fact, the appraisers, we've had, I think there was 5 in '92, and to date there's 28 firms.
And realtors, we had 300, now we got 700.
Yeah, so you know those are all going to be affected with any downturn at all. If you go back to the late '70s, we had possibly the same amount of realtors at that time. I know that because we're in the real estate business, but there's about 600 realtors at that time as compared to that today. And in a real low point of our market in the early 80s, we got down to 110 realtors. So you can see how any increases will, people just kind of generate and climb aboard. The builders we've probably tripled in the last 4 years. And a lot of those people are coming from out of state, obviously, and a lot of it's for, you know, there's job opportunities here because of what's going on, but for the most part, and we'll probably talk about it as we go through the program, it's really a quality of life thing that they're looking for.
Chris, have you seen the same kind of growth in the commercial end of the real estate business?
Actually, the commercial part of the market right now is probably at an all-time high, which is feeding off 5 or 6 years of real strong residential growth. Commercial growth kind of gets pent up as all these homes and the people come in. We need hairdressers, we need video stores, we need restaurants, we need department stores, that type of thing. So right now there's been some huge activity on property along Highway 95, along Celtice corridor there in Celtice. So commercial's very active right now.
This makes a good point. You know, there's a lot of pent-up demand. From 80 to about 86, 87, there wasn't much that happened, so there's been a lot of demand in the last 3 or 4 years as a result of that.
The vacancy rates in our commercial projects are at an all-time low. I mean, we are bumping up against 100% occupancies in almost everything that we manage. But again, you know, you're still looking at a balance where it could easily turn the other direction if we aren't cautious in what we're doing.
But a lot of that, Jack, is the way a market evolves. We had to have that population growth to make the commercial market feasible to develop, and so it's that evolutionary process that's taken place. We've gone through several years of strong population growth, and we've really got an ebb in the demand and the activity in the residential market, but we're seeing a spark of activity and actually a tremendous amount of depth and breadth in the degree and the type of commercial and industrial activity in the marketplace now.
Mm-hmm. Tony, if you'll let me pursue one more round of questions, I was going to ask Ed, with his background in appraising, to give us some idea of what's happened over the last decade or so. And I picked that number because conveniently for me, I've been here about 10 and a half years, and I recall coming here from Wyoming most recently, but before that from St. Louis, and I thought this was just a tremendous real estate bargain. And I was not in the commercial market at that time, but just as a potential residential home buyer, I'd never been in a place where you could get so much home for relatively so little money. Can you tell us a little bit about how that has changed over the years, Ed?
Well, I haven't looked at any statistics over that particular 10-year time frame, but understand that we were, for a long time, in terms of parity in other areas, we had cheap housing, relatively low development and construction costs in this area. So we had housing bargains, comparatively speaking, compared to high-priced metropolitan markets in this country, and particularly areas in Wyoming and California and Oregon and Washington that suffered from high population and high development costs. That, to a large extent, has been mitigated by 3 or 4 years of high appreciation locally. Sometimes our market has equaled or exceeded appreciation rates for metropolitan areas that led the nation. We may well be up at the 15 to 20% per year appreciation rate locally over some of the last 4 years. And to a large extent, comparing house prices from 10 years ago to the present time, we've caught up a lot or eradicated and erased the bargains, the housing bargains that existed in this particular area compared with other areas of the country. We're no longer a cheap housing market compared to most areas of the country. And that has led to a change in migration and selection of Coeur d'Alene as a retirement or destination for people that selected on the basis of that criteria. And it's also had some effect on industrial and commercial recruitment and development, where cheap housing is no longer one of the elements that used to be a site selection criteria.
John, if I could follow up on that for just a minute, you talked earlier about the fact that we had 600 realtors here in the mid-'70s, dropped to a low of just over 100 in the '80s, and I know from talking to other people that my wife and I got here at a real low point for residential real estate market in this area. Now we're back up to 700 again. In that period of the early to mid-'80s, had prices actually declined from the '70s or just gone through a substantial flat period?
Well, actually, '79 was still a pretty good market, but you got 80, 81, and you got to 83, 84, 85, and things actually did go down a little bit. In fact, I did a study a couple of years ago, And I went back and actually found some hard sales of homes that had sold in 80 and actually had resold in maybe 86. And there was actually some negative appreciation.
Depreciation.
From 86 to 90, it went up about 7-8% a year. So yeah, the house prices did go down.
And
a lot of that was because the rates were real high. If you remember, the 14-16%
Oh, yes. Yeah.
made a big difference.
Commercial market pretty well paralleled the residential market during those periods?
I would say probably that's true. I think one of the things I wanted to piggyback on what Ed was mentioning is that in the industrial market, in the California marketplace, as we've been talking, we in our area, our prices have continued to escalate. And so when we are finding companies trying to come out of the California market, coming to North Idaho, they're finding that their rental rates, looking at North Idaho now, are substantially higher than what they can rent comparable prices for in California. And that's a concern to us in North Idaho, and we're trying to get people to relocate here. If we're not able to find an economic base for them that's competitive, then we're going to have some difficulty. So we in the real estate business are continually trying to keep those prices where we can keep our rents where they'd be competitive.
Yeah, that's a good point, because you talk to Bob Potters at Job Plus, and he'll say that our rental rates for commercial are higher than in California, and the Californians coming up here residentially kind of piggyback that, and they say your prices for new construction and new homes are really parallel or higher than down there right now.
I think part of that, though, is the fact that California had a lot of vacant buildings. They had big buildings, they were vacant, and they got very aggressive on their lease rates.
Right.
And it's not so much a matter of our rates being overly expensive. They were probably real average, but
They got cheap.
they got
Yeah.
real cheap.
That's a good point.
And there was a lot of competition, but that's changing out there. Those buildings are starting to fill up, and it's going to equalize.
Right. Well, one of
Good point.
that's part of that. But at the same time, though, we have taken on an attitude in some areas, where we are adding a lot of costs on top of our infrastructure, which is causing our cost of construction to keep escalating, and that's a concern unless we're able to control that. Where in California, they're recognizing to keep it intact.
You've built a bridge that I want to go across at this point. Certainly with growth and trends, if you go from Portland to Seattle, that belt has been growing a long time. There's certain areas in Montana that had experienced great growth like we have in North Idaho, and that is interrelated between states and a lot from California. And I was noticing statistics recently that the movement to Idaho is more from Washington, Oregon than it is California. And my first question is to Ed Morris and to Jack Beebe, and then move on to the others. There's interlinking of all these processes, and so if we can help our viewers in the other states with this question, would be helpful. Would you share what we talked about prior to the program, that what the Federal Reserve does concerning interest rates, regulation in states, California and now Idaho, and how all of these, as you said to me, Ed, before the show, there's a lot of dynamics that influence an increase in growth, a leveling out, or a decline.
Markets are continually evolving and changing, and real estate markets are very complex because they're based on both national and local and regional economic trends, and the dynamics that come into play there get very complex. Our local Kootenai County market is to some extent influenced by in-migration and our regional economy. It's to some extent influenced by local employment and local supply and demand. And it's also influenced by national economic factors like interest rates. And so as all of these things interact, they make and influence what we perceive and describe as the local real estate market. We went through a period of time where the California economy was very weak, and we had very strong in-migration, both in terms of residential population, and we had a lot of industrial and commercial recruitment, which boosted our local economy. As their economy, the California economy, has recovered, we've seen those trends slow down substantially. And I think we're getting back to a more typical migration pattern where the adjacent states of Washington and Oregon comprise more of the people coming in than people from California, and that was largely influenced by their economic conditions down there rather than anything that we did up here. As our markets have changed, we've influenced some of the reasons why they moved here, and that was price attractivity or low pricing. And so to to some degree, the reason for some of that growth has changed. And then our market is further influenced by national economic policies, such things as interest rates. And as we've seen mortgage interest rates move up 100 or 150 basis points, that swing in interest rate significantly changes what the typical buyer can afford in terms of price level and mortgage. And so we've seen a decline in our own housing activity as well as nationally and regionally because of mortgage rates and because of local economic factors. For example, our lumber employment in lumber markets now are slow in relation to past activity. Construction employment is declining. And all those things influence not only our local real estate markets, but are influenced by factors outside this market.
Jack, would you take us through, it was a really interesting discussion we had where you talked about California had a certain policy concerning regulations and other factors, and then we were in a different situation. Now that is reversing. Just take us through the difference and how that affects the process.
A number of years ago, of course, we were taking the position that we were in need of growth, and the city leaders and the city fathers and the people that were actively involved in the community were doing what we could to bring growth into Kootenai County. And as that all began, and as new people came into our area, with the stress on infrastructure and our schools and some of the other things that happens with continued growth, and you have some activity abreast there that's going to try to slow it down. And with that then comes additional regulations. So a number of years ago, California was overregulated, and their prices were high, and employment was low, and so they were having an economic stress, and our area was a good place for these people to come to, not only developers, but people to move to, and we were welcoming them with open arms. But in the last few years, because of the stress on our infrastructure, we have been doing what is necessary, or the city fathers have been doing what necessary to slow this thing down so the whole thing will balance out with what we have as far as infrastructure is concerned. And so consequently now we've kind of reversed positions with what California was about 10 years ago. But to allude to probably one of the most important parts of it all, we still have one of the most livable places there is in the United States, and one of the most beautiful places to live in. And so even though there is this number of constraints that are put upon development and growth at this point in time, I think we're still going to be a healthy economy just because of our livability, and people are coming here for that reason.
We've preserved our high quality of life.
We have, and I think it's important that we do. There's no doubt about that.
John, you and I were talking too concerning the how these prices fluctuate and so forth. And now, would you take our viewers through that? Through this growth, how the price of homes and so forth has risen here as they've leveled off other places, and how that affects the market?
Well, it's amazing, to give you an idea, in the late 80s, I guess it was, Californians were really going through a real tremendous, you could sell anything down there in a day or two, and they were getting tremendous prices for their homes, maybe a $500,000, $600,000 sale, but because of the way our tax capital gains laws are situated, they have to come up here and kind of buy that amount. So they came up here and they bought. They weren't really afraid to spend some money. They bought, and I'm not going to say they were foolish, but they were almost forced to buy something in the higher price range as well. Today, that same $500,000, $600,000 home, I'm using California because that seems to be 60 to 70% of where our immigration is coming from. They'll be lucky to get maybe $300,000, $350,000 for that same home. So now they're still selling, they're still coming up for the same reasons, quality of life, but they're not coming up with as much money. So that the upper end markets kind of that greed factor has come down. You're not trying getting high prices for the homes, and of course that trickles down to the lower entry homes. 80% of our marketplace in residential is 150 and under, and to get from 150 to the 300 range, you have to sell that home to somebody. And those people are very price conscious. Every $100 makes a big difference on what they can afford.
Chris, did you see the same thing in the commercial property, that they could sell commercial property in California at a larger, rather good profit, and then come here and find property cheaper, or did it too go up at the same way that residential did when they needed to invest?
Well, commercial properties has certainly gone up. But in comparison, our prices are very, very cheap. Our highest price ground here a few years ago was maybe $10 or $12 a square foot. Well, that's not that expensive in some markets where you're talking $20, $30 a square foot just for the bare ground. in the leasing market, it's just been a real tight market. We have companies coming to town, and we don't have a place to put them if they need a large facility. So they have to be patient. We either have to build a facility, or they have to build a facility, or we find an investor to do it. So that type of pressure does create increasing rents. But we have seen a lot of investment coming through on 1031 exchanges. That's kind of the last loophole in the tax law where you can sell an investment property and move the money to another real estate investment here and defer the income taxes due on that. And that has filtered through whether it's a $125,000 duplex or a multi-million-dollar project.
Steve Sheen.
Let me take just a different tact, and I'm going to talk about real estate as an investment. John, if I came to you today, and let's forget 1031 exchanges or the need to reinvest money from a sale of a house in California, but I just came to you and said, I want to buy something in this market that's going to appreciate. What would you steer me to?
I get that question asked all the time. You know,
All the time.
What you've really seen appreciate, even in a down market around here, is anything with obviously water frontage or maybe water view. You know, those are always things that people are looking. Not everybody can afford it, but those, and there's so little of it maybe that when the people can't afford it, they don't mind paying a little bit more. They're not subject to qualifying for loans a lot of times and stuff. So waterfront and water view are excellent investments. You know, just to go forward a little bit, you know, in the late 80s when the Californians were selling their houses for $600, and then they couldn't sell them, and now they're selling them for $300. You know, they're not coming up here for the money. You know, it's the quality of life, and not coming up here to make a lot of money. It's just really the quality of life, and they see it up there. It's amazing what they put up with down there. I had a client tell me the other day, he said, you know, John, we're going to move to Idaho, and it's going to be amazing, but we're going to say, how did we ever put up with that down there? Because you learn to live with things. And they're not talking about drive-by shootings, gunshots at night, things like that. We're not subject to that up here.
We're not.
So I don't think people are really coming up here because they get a better bargain or make more money, but it's really a quality of life.
Jack and Chris, I've got a similar question for you, I guess. And Jack, earlier you said that we're moving to the point here where at least in commercial real estate, we're 100% rented almost. So my question is almost a little bit naive maybe, but I guess I'm looking for real hot spots. It sounds like the whole commercial market is hot, but is there a segment of it that is particularly, are we lacking in large commercial property, small commercial property? What are people looking for that they absolutely can't find?
Had a program the other day with one of our local engineering companies where we had brought a bunch of realtors and other concerned citizens together to trying to find out what the market gaps were in our particular area, and it was surprising to hear people's varied opinions. But one of the areas of concern, I think, and I think probably Chris would agree with me, is the lack of good industrial space, light industrial to heavy industrial space that right now really it's just not there, and we need to have it at a price that is going to be competitive with the California market or Oregon or Washington, because we need to get some additional value added type industry to come into the Kootenai County, North Idaho area, not just service business. So it would be, and I know working with Bob Potter that is an area that I think is of concern. When we talk about 100% rented, you know, that we're talking more about retail space. Most of that stuff is staying fairly well leased, but it's still a delicate market. It's still, you know, this is still North Idaho. We got 80,000 people to 90,000. This is not Los Angeles, so it could easily come out of balance. But the area that I think of biggest interest to me would be in the light industrial area. We could bring in some of these good smaller companies that North Idaho really needs.
Chris, I'm going to follow up on Jack's answer just a little bit. We got to bear in mind who we are and where we are. I mean, this is North Idaho, and it's still a relatively small community. Is the kind of space Jack's describing, is that realistic to inventory in a market like this, or is it a build-to-suit kind of thing?
That's a tough question. You certainly love to do a build-to-suit project when you know you've got a great company on the line and a long-term lease. To go out and spec a very large industrial building is very risky in our size market. So, you know, we would love to see those companies come in and provide additional jobs in the industrial sector. And I agree, retail, it's almost 100%. It's very difficult in retail. Crystal ball question of where it's going. Highway 95 is red hot right now. There's several new projects that have been announced. There's several more that are yet to be announced. Post Falls along the Southeast corridor I think there was 50 smaller projects built along that strip last year. And then out there near the factory outlet mall, there's this opportunity out there. And can't forget Hayden. There's projects popping up in Hayden as well.
But the majority of those projects still are service-oriented type retailers. You know, we're not talking about the value-added business, and I'm sure Ed would agree with me that we need to get that industrial base built up and not just continue to focus on the service end, or we're going to find ourselves, I think, a little thin. But granted, I mean, it's a very important part of our economy.
Well, that's true. But I think we've got projects in our office right now for 3 light industrial buildings.
Good.
The nature of the process is such that this is a small enough market, and it's so capital intensive to develop those kinds of buildings that you've got to have tenants. It's probably not prudent in most instances to develop vacant speculative space, and that's the reason why you're not seeing inventory expand probably as quick as some people would like. On the other hand, when you've got buildings sitting vacant, it's very expensive to carry.
We're just about out of time, but I have one question that deals again with interest rates. If the interest rates go up 1% or go up 2%, no matter what you're doing locally and how you're looking at that process, and the mortgage rates are affected with that, does there have to be a slowdown?
One would normally come to that conclusion, and certainly as it relates to residential real estate, I think all of us would agree that mortgage interest rates to a large degree influence the size and the depth of the demand market segment that you're looking at. And for a 1 or 2% swing in residential real estate mortgage rates from 8% to 9.5%, you're going to lose 20 to 40% of your market for that big of a swing. It has less effect on commercial and industrial markets. Those are driven by other factors, and to the extent that you can change rents.
We're out of time. I have the signal. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. It's been a most informative program, and thank you for your time.
We enjoyed it.
Ladies and gentlemen, our guests have been businessmen here in North Idaho discussing the real estate market and the economy in general. I know you found this program informative, and I would invite you to be with us again next week at this same time when we will discuss yet another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.